Hello, Mark Wickel, Technical Practice Manager here at Planet Technologies. I'm super excited to bring you another monthly tech update. As I shared on my last video, the purpose of these is to just sort of keep things brief and to focus on Azure DevOps, Dev, and the data platform updates. Anything that might be new or exciting that was announced over the last month, or just things that we might be working on as a team that we think are interesting and want to share with you. Maybe insights that we have with other customers. Or in this particular case, an insight based on something that we did internally. And so I'd like to start this month just talking about our TFS to DevOps move. So we've been using DevOps for a while, about a year and a half across our teams, but we also had a lot of users that were still using TFS because they weren't part of the DevOps sort of pilot. We had a lot of data too that spanned back over the last 2 decades that we wanted to migrate as well. So we kind of underwent that process, and I just wanted to share some insights with you on it. So, I don't know that there's anything super surprising here. Planning is certainly the key. It was something that we found was really important. Meeting with the different groups, understanding the process, understanding how they wanted to be able to get to their data, getting an inventory of everything that we had in the system and figuring out what was necessary, what was not necessary. In some cases, we decided, work item tracking history was not important. In other cases, we thought it might be more important. And we had some projects that were definitely much older that we hadn't touched in a long, long time, decided in our case that we wanted to move that to, say, an archive instead of putting it in DevOps. And that just made a little bit more sense, not from a disk storage perspective, but really just more from the fact that we wanted DevOps to be a nice, clean environment when our developers logged in or our stakeholders logged in and they could find things easily. We did have some projects that were currently in active development, and so the process for getting around that was to simply set the repos as read-only after we had done a migration of the content and verified it, and then do a Delta migration. But I would say one of the biggest things that we found was simply we wanted to restructure some of our TFVC projects as Get. And I think, broadly, I try to push everyone to move that way. And in some cases, there was some valid reasons why that wasn't the case. But, the biggest driver for that, and this comes up all the time with customers, and why I really want to talk and do a bit of a deep dive on it, is that, as you're using DevOps, the structure is a little bit different than what you have on-prem. And so just as a reminder how this works, in DevOps, you have different projects, team projects, and inside of there, you can add individual teams, you can add different repositories and branches. So you can have multiple repositories as long as you're using Get, and that was kind of the key. And then you can add different agents, agent pools, and deployment pools to support different types of continuous integration across projects. So there is a notion of user management, team management, and deployment within an individual team project. And so, Microsoft's guidance, you can see here on the slide, there's reasons why you might create new team projects, and in most cases, we found internally we could support across a single business unit, a single team project with multiple sort of repos underneath. And so because of that, we drove to go to Get. I think that there's other advantages that we'll find moving to Get as we've been doing for a while, but this was definitely probably the biggest driver. So as it relates to DevOps too, just really quickly, over the last month, Sprint 142 and 143 were released, and with it came a number of new enhancements. Most of them were relatively minor. There was a new text editor capability, a rich text editor that supports actually code snippets and some emojis and things like that, which are kind of interesting. There was some stuff to support pipelines around YAML pipelines, Linux container support, and some things like that. And there was also the ability, which I think was kind of the biggest thing for me, was the ability to sort of roll back a release in the event of a failure automatically. So I think we've all been in situations where you're trying to deploy code. For whatever reason, that code fails, and then you have to manually find the last sort of successful deployment and redeploy that manually. Well, you don't have to do that any longer. It can do it for you automatically. And although that was the most interesting thing for me, the Sprint team actually stated that the #1 requested feature was rolled out this last month, which was the dark theme. And I found that kind of fascinating that users were most asking for that feature. It's now available if that's something that interests you. So take a look. On the dev front, a Connect was Tuesday, and with that came a number of announcements. And unfortunately, there's way too many to sort of dive into on this particular session. But what I hope to do over the next two is kind of maybe focus in on some of the things that were announced and just kind of give you Planet's insights on some of them. But for me, the most exciting thing, of course, was the Visual Studio 2019 announcement going into public preview. It's the first public preview for 2019, and any new Visual Studio announcement is pretty exciting. There were a lot of things that were sort of bundled up in that announcement. There's always performance improvements typically with Visual Studio. They're kind of going back to a little bit of a different look and feel around some themes and the new Lemniscate logo, which actually kind of looks like the old Simplify logo. There's some enhancements around Git. So, you'll see that as soon as you start Visual Studio, there's better Git integration. Again, just kind of sort of driving that pattern. Another thing that we considered is we were seeing Visual Studio trending more towards Git. I do want to cover debugging in a little bit more detail in another video. I think that there's going to be some really great enhancements around debugging. But if I had to pick one feature around the new Visual Studio, and this is actually something that's been available as an add-on for 2017, but that's the live share feature. It's a really cool feature if you haven't had a chance to use it. The idea is that you can actually share code collaboratively in real time without having to do a screen share. So if you have some cascading style sheets that you and a partner want to work on, you can do that. You can see those updates similar to what we see with Office Online and being able to co-author documents. It's actually going to be enabled by default in 2019. It no longer requires like an add-on to do that, an extension. And there's some UI improvements. So we're going to keep taking a look at that. But that was like when I saw that they were actually putting more effort into that, I got personally excited about it. And with the new version of Visual Studio comes some announcements around .NET Core. .NET Core 2 actually had a significant update. 2.2 had an update this particular month as well, but .NET Core 3 was sort of the star of the show. It's actually seeing its first public preview release, and they had some information in there about what is new and what is exciting. Now, remember, the whole advantage to .NET Core is that with the sort of in-place state of .NET framework over the past 2 decades, there's a lot of sort of slowness around releasing new updates because there's concern about breaking existing applications and that type of thing. Whereas .NET Core is getting these much more frequent updates. There's some performance improvements, of course, with the platform. There's some deployment advantages around sort of side-by-side installs and that type of thing. And if you haven't started with .NET Core, you definitely want to be getting into that. If you want to connect on, I'd be happy to do that. But .NET Core 3 brings sort of desktop applications as first-class citizens as part of the .NET Core story. And so if you're developing desktop applications, Microsoft's recommending that you kind of get in there, start with .NET Core 3 preview, and start developing all new applications there. That's their vision. They've provided, I have the link here, some methods for you to also start considering a migration path for your existing desktop applications to .NET Core, and you can take advantage of some of those speed and deployment things that we talked about earlier. As part of that, Microsoft also announced that WPF WinForms and WinUI are going open source. That was a pretty big deal, and that will be hosted in GitHub under the stewardship of the .NET Foundation. So if you want to contribute to that, you're more than welcome to. For those of you that joined us last month, I also like to feature a data piece. So this month, I'd like to talk about PowerBI data flow. So the idea around data flow is relatively simple. We have a lot of developers who are creating PowerBI content using Power Query, and they are storing that within the report, and it's getting kind of locked in there. So the idea of Power BI data flow is that you can actually share those capabilities in an app workspace across other authors developing Power BI reports. So there's a separate tab. It's kind of a first-class citizen. It brings essentially a web-based version of Power Query to you with some limitations because it's going into beta, and it went into beta in November, excuse me. And you can author sort of your own report model and ETL logic, save that, and then you can pull that that data flow into your actual project and do further manipulation there if you like to. If you have Power BI Premium, you can actually do incremental refreshes of the data. So that which lives in the data flow is actually stored in Azure Data Lake Store Gen 2. The content lives there, and if you don't have Premium, you kind of got to do these sort of refreshes manually, and if you have a lot of data, it takes a while. So by having Premium, you get to take advantage of that sort of performance update. But the other thing that's really nice about Premium is you can also have linked power or data flows as well. So if you have multiple pieces of logic and you want to tie them together, you can absolutely do that. The data in your data flows can be mapped also to a standardized data schema using a common data model stored in the data lake store inside of a common folder, and that can be shared across other applications or business processes. So if you're using Flow or Dynamics or other things that conform to the common data model, great, you have that capability as well. The one thing that I think was the most exciting about this announcement is the fact that although by default it's storing things in the sort of the Power BI data lake store, you can bring your own. And so that's awesome news for developers who might be working with other projects, but not necessarily with Power BI, and they want to take advantage of some of the data models that others have put together, or the workflows, excuse me, that others have put together, and take advantage of those in their own applications, or they might want to do some other types of insights or other things that are outside of the Power BI realm. And so Microsoft's going to allow you to bring your sort of own data lake store and be able to do those sort of manipulations. Just to keep in mind, again, this is in beta. There are sort of a limited number of connection capabilities available. They're still pretty vast, but it's not exactly what you're going to see one for one in Power BI Desktop. And there's also some limitations around security, because one of the things that we see commonly is the desire for row-level security, which is naturally a capability in Power BI Desktop. But because of the way the content is stored in Azure Data Lake Store Gen 2, you don't have that type of capability. But I am excited about this service. I think we're going to see a lot of improvements there in the month ahead. Microsoft is promising to make quick, rapid changes to it. So that's all I have for this month. If you would like to talk more, please feel free to connect with me. I'd love to hear your feedback or things that you'd like to talk about and see in future videos. Thank you again for watching. Take care.